Do you carry out or work with any particular ritual practice in your chaos magic?
Yes. So sometimes it's very formalized, sometimes it isn't. These days it tends to be much more informal. So um, I will make a sigil and do a little charging ritual that can take less than a minute to do. So this idea that magic has to be this sort of grand thing that takes a long time isn't necessarily true. It depends what you're trying to do. And in the case of making sigils, it tends to be in my experience, the shorter the better. So I will, if I'm sitting on the tube going somewhere, sometimes I get out, I carry a pencil and a pad of paper to make sigils, if I remember it. And I will sit and make a sigil while I'm on the tube quickly. I use a brief kind of meditation thing to implant it and charge it, and then I borrow my wife's lighter and burn it at the earliest opportunity. And that is the ritual. Sometimes if I'm making servitors, if I have time, I will create something more formalized with a circle, with candles, with sigil representations. I generally tend to do that more for servitors. So I conjure the servitor I talk to. I use a pendulum and a tarot deck to speak to the servitor. So I suppose that's the difference. It's just the length of time. When it comes to like which one should you do, it's personal. Like depends what you like doing, because it's the bit that's going to engage your mind the most. I have practiced some sort of hybrid voodoo, which is much more ritualistic, I suppose, where you have an altar and candles and offerings and things like that. And I've done some Enochian magic, which is extremely ritualized, and it's long. And that's what most people would think about, because I think most people's idea of ceremonial magic comes from medieval ceremonial magic, or it's, you know, this idea that it has to be long and complicated, and that's not necessarily the case. And I also don't think the ritual is, how to phrase this, I think it's a necessary component in the formalized sense. The act of sitting and drawing the sigil is a ritual. And to go off on a slight tangent, the thing I think is most important is uncovering your intent. And I have a protocol that I use that's in my book. And the act of sitting and writing out what you think you want and why you think you want it and answering questions around it, again, is the ritual. And I think it's very easy to confuse sort of the bit at the end where you're drawing the circles and dancing around and lighting fires as the most important bit, and to me that isn't. I generally find if you uncover your intent up front, you may not even need to get to ritual phase, if you like, to sort of have an intent. So but the short version is, if I'm doing sigils, it tends to be quite short. If I'm doing something more spirity, I suppose it tends to be longer and more what most people would recognize as a ritual.